Welcome to the Anime Audiophile Podcast. Please like and subscribe for more. Thank you. Naruto Shinden, Parent and Child Day. Chapter 2. Father and Daughter, Forms of Happiness. The day before Family Day, while everyone else in Konohagakure was excitedly preparing for the holiday, in one corner of the village, Uzumaki Hinata hurriedly slipped through the gate to the Hyuga main house, the place where she'd been bombed. Without stopping to tidy the sandals she kicked off in the entryway, she raced intently down the hallway, wooden floorboards creaking. She didn't hesitate as she made her way through the enormous house, turning corner after corner until she caught sight of her younger sister. Hanabi? Hinata. Hanabi was crumpled on the floor in front of closed shoji doors, covering her mouth with the sleeve of her kimono, as if to hide a face swollen from crying. That morning, a messenger had come to tell Hinata that their father, Hyuga Hayashi, had collapsed. She'd wanted to rush to his side right then and there, but faced with Himawari, she'd been at a loss for words. How on earth was she supposed to tell her still young daughter that it might be time for her to say goodbye to her grandfather? Unable to bring herself to have that conversation just yet, Hinata left the house alone without telling anyone the details of the situation. She'd been spurred on by her own worry, but now that she'd made it to her family home, her heart froze at the sight of the weeping Hanabi, as though an icicle had been plunged into her chest. "How's father?" she asked in a trembling voice. Hanabi glanced at the sliding doors at their father's room out of the corner of her eye. But she quickly dropped her head and averted her gaze. "Not great. He's been moaning and groaning this whole time. He says his body won't do what he wants. That's..." A shiver ran up Hinata's spine. Their father, the very picture of Spartan living, had always been strict with his daughters, with fellow students, and with his own self. To protect the Hyuga name and all it stood for, he trained incessantly with almost obsessive devotion. He insisted that failing health was proof of a lack of discipline of the physical body. Not only had he never fallen ill, he had never so much as bent a knee to another person. Impossible to think that such a man would take to his sickbed now. So, Hanabi whirled her head around, anxiously trying to see behind Hinata. "Where's Boruto?" "He's not with you?" "He's on a mission until this evening," Hinata replied. "Hey, what about the doctor?" "What did the doctor say?" "Doctor?" "Oh, the doctor." Hanabi stared off into space. She said to put a cold pack on it and rest for now." "A cold pack?" Hinata frowned. "Is all this because of a fever?" Hinata felt something off in Hanabi's attitude, but before she could wonder further, her sister shot another question at her. "So what about Himawari?" "I didn't know what to tell her," she mumbled. "So I left her at home." "What? So then you came home all by yourself? What's that about?" Hanabi sprawled out, arms and legs splayed on the floor. Hinata was ready to ask her the same thing. "Hey, Hanabi? Is this maybe?" "Karake, karake, karake." A sound like a walnut being crushed. Veins popped up around Hinata's white eyes, a new iris springing up in the center as a snowy white light radiated outward. That light came from her Byakugan, a powerful technique passed down through the Hyuga clan. The Byakugan could see through all things, including the flow and nature of the chakra coursing through a human body. With this ocular jutsu, Hinata could see in essentially all directions, even detecting a soldier hiding several hundred meters away. And of course, she could see through walls as well. In the face of the Byakugan, the thin paper of the shoji doors might as well have been invisible. Hinata turned toward her father's room. She peered through the shoji and saw him laid out on a futon in the center of a room covered in tatami mats. Feeling a pang of guilt at turning the Byakugan on her own father, she stared at him intently. There was nothing wrong with his lungs or his digestive organs. His blood circulated unhindered, and his liver was also the picture of health, perhaps because he hated heavy drinking. Only the muscles from his back down into his hips were a little tense. Fathers. Hinata stared at Hanabi with her white eyes. There was no need to use the Byakugan. Her younger sister was not actually crying. He just threw out his back, didn't he? Yes, Hanabi replied curtly, and began to kick and flail on the floor. Ah. And here I thought I'd finally get to see my adorable nephew and nieces. So you... Hinata started. You know, it's not okay to lie about father did collapse, Hanabi cut her off. And he's making a fool of himself, fainting in agony over some back pain. This was a side of her father she had never seen before. Still, when she realized his life was in no particular danger, Hinata felt the dark thing stuck in her chest melt away. She took one deep breath after another as she slumped down to the ground. And while I'm at it, Hanabi said. She had pulled herself into a sitting position and now pointed at their father's room. Father's actually the one who wanted to see Boruto and Himawari, you know. He kept going on and on about how he could never face them in this condition, but then he was asking me if they'd really be all that upset seeing him like this. Or how he could comfort them if they did cry. He keeps grumbling and muttering and dithering. He could just say he wants them to come over. Their father had always been strict, both with his daughters and with himself. But there were exceptions, or rather, one exception. And that was when it came to his grandchildren. The stern master of the house vanished the second they walked through the door. He was unbelievably doting every time he saw them, calling to them in a soft, coaxing voice, hugging them, pinching their cheeks, patting their heads like he thought the sun rose and set on them. When Hinata was a child, she hadn't had the greatest relationship with her father. With her Chunin exam, the distance between them had closed to some extent, but this was still a change she never dreamed she'd see in him. He might spoil those kids, Hinata muttered, slowly. But I guess he'll never spoil us. Exactly how long are you going to stand up there whispering? Came their father's voice from inside his room. Unconsciously, Hinata straightened up, and Hanabi stuck out her tongue. Fine, okay, we're coming. Hanabi opened the sliding door, and Hinata saw their father was sitting up in his futon. She hadn't seen him for a while. His hair had gotten grayer as he'd aged, but the sharp light in his eyes and the intimidating air around him hadn't diminished at all. Why did that all go out the window the second he saw his grandchildren? Like Hanabi, her father kept glancing behind her. Where's Boruto? Himawari's not with you, he asked impatiently. With a sigh, Hinata settled down beside him. I'm by myself. I hurried over, so. Is that so? Even out of the corner of her eye, she could clearly see her father's shoulders slump. His posture practically screamed that she alone was not enough, and she felt the tiniest bit of indignation bite into her. But now that I'm here looking at him up close. Before she could put the feelings welling up in her heart into words, Hanabi leaned over and whispered into her ear, You're thinking father's gotten old, aren't you? Bullseye. Hinata was hard-pressed for a reply, however, and Hanabi brought her face in even closer. I think that's probably because of you. What do you mean? Hinata was startled. You call him grandfather now when Boruto and Himawari are around, right? I think that sort of put the idea in his mind, you know? Like, oh, right, I'm an old man now. He started using old man words when he talks, too. That's... She tried to protest. Can you prove that's not it? Hanabi stared at her intently. Hinata was at a loss. Her father was getting old because of her? The thought had never so much as crossed her mind. Both of you. You can't possibly have that much to sit around and whisper about. She chuckled now that he had recovered from the shock of his grandchildren's absence, utterly ignorant of his daughter's concerns. Sorry for worrying you, Hinata. Honestly, she sighed. You could have just said you threw out your back. What? It's obviously embarrassing. He frowned. It's much more difficult than you'd imagine to admit you're old. Old. Feeling a pinch of discomfort at the word, Hinata averted her eyes. She turned instead to Hanabi. Her younger sister grinned like a child who had successfully pulled off a prank. She didn't say a thing out loud, but Hinata read the message in her playful eyes loud and clear. So you finally noticed? She wanted to rebut her sister, but her father opened his mouth before she could. And how is Naruto then? I heard he's as busy as ever. Why yes, she stammered. He hasn't even been able to come home lately. So then Hayashi started to say, and then suddenly cut himself off. He fell silent, as if feigning a nonchalance, and closed his eyes, the furrow between his brows growing deeper. Hinata watched him, puzzled. Unlike Hanabi's easy-to-read face, she had no idea what her father was trying to say. Finally, he opened his eyes again. And how are Boruto and Himawari? He asked with a smile, changing the subject and the mood in the room. Her discomfort was still gnawing at her, but she couldn't exactly bring the age question back up. Himawari's sad her dad hasn't been coming home. But she understands that he has to work. Boruto is hanging out with friends on Genin missions. Fighting with his father. There were too many ways to finish that sentence, and she struggled with where to start. Hanabi took her silence to mean something else. Getting to be time for him to strike out on his own. Isn't that sad for you? No, that's... She tried to deny it, but ended up trailing off. No way. Hanabi cried. I hit the nail on the head? He's not leaving home, Hinata protested. He's still a child and a real handful. It's just... Lately, he's been buying things with his own money, and I'm a little worried. Well, of course he's going to buy things now that he's getting paid for missions, Hanabi said. It's sort of ridiculous to get an allowance from your parents forever. So what did he start buying? Snacks? Video games? Underpants, Hinata replied. Hanabi froze with her mouth open on the U, but then quickly broke into a wide smile and began to laugh loudly. Ha 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 ha. What is that about? You're getting worried about a thing like that? About something as simple as Boruto buying his own underpants? It's just, the colors he chooses are kind of off, she protested. Like, fluorescent pink, you know? He's got good taste. Her sister shrugged. When I peek into his room at night, his bow will be glowing in the dark. That's very Boruto. Hanabi wiped away tears from laughing too hard. Hinata patted her cheek, a troubled look on her face, but then stopped abruptly. Her father had pulled a notebook out of his pocket and was writing something down. She narrowed her eyes. Even without the Byakugan, she could pick up the details. Boruto likes fluorescent pink. Father. She cleared her throat as if admonishing him. Her father didn't only express his love through excessive and overbearing physical contact, he also tried to capture their hearts with presents. If she didn't set him straight right away, her whole house might end up fluorescent pink. But it appeared she was just a tiny bit too late. Her father turned toward her sister and asked, was there anything fluorescent pink in the presents we bought for today? I'm not sure. Hanabi headed for a corner of the room. Hinata gulped in surprise when she saw the mountain of presents wrapped in colorful paper that filled the decorative Tokonoma alcove. Incredible. She stared at her father, dumbfounded. Got a bit carried away. He rubbed his hip, seeming embarrassed. Just happened to end up like this once we put them all together in one place. That wasn't exactly the answer she'd been looking for, but before she could say anything, she heard the KRK of Hanabi using her Byakugan. Nope, nothing. It's all black or gray. And brown. Dark brown. What about the sweets? He asked. Those are black and tea green. And brown and dark brown. Hanabi frowned. Father, did you really need to buy so many senbei crackers? You got doubles here with the rich soy and plain soy flavors. Boruto and Imawari might end up fighting over them if I don't have one for each, their father noted, ever serious. Hinata's head started to hurt. She pressed her fingers to her temples. Fluorescent pink snacks were far too disturbing to give to her children, and at any rate, they were not going to start a fight over senbei of all things. The presents her father selected were always off somehow. Exactly like Boruto thinking that fluorescent pink was cool. I think maybe the kids probably don't really want fluorescent pink toys and snacks. While she was at it, she added in a small voice, or senbei. Oh. Her father crossed his arms, a complicated expression on his face. Is that so? Well then, what do they want? She had expected this question, but she was still stuck for an answer. She didn't actually want to say anything when she thought about her house being buried in whatever she told him. But she couldn't lie either. His heart was in the right place, after all. She wanted to respect that. After struggling with the question, she had a flash of insight. Actually, there is this thing Boruto's been obsessed with lately. This card game, what was it called? Fierce Ninja? Something like that. She bit her lip, frustrated that she couldn't remember the name. Oh, X cards? Hanabi interjected unexpectedly. Hayashi grew more solemn, more sternly handsome, perhaps because of the unfamiliar words. Oh, a card game. X cards. The proper name is Extreme Ninja, but everyone calls it X cards. You play all these famous ninja. Oh. It's kind of like Hanafuda cards, Hanabi explained smoothly. Dumbfounded, Hinata stared at her sister. You sure know a lot about. Well, you know. It is popular and all. Hang on. I should have a few cards in my room. She stepped out into the hall without waiting for a reply. Hinata noticed that her father's expression was as complicated as it had been earlier. He said, the furrow between his brows disappearing as he felt her gaze on him. About these X cards or whatever they are. She said the game is about famous ninja, but what era of ninja exactly? I think it covers shinobi from all times and places. I guess there's a Naruto card in there. Hinata shrugged. But I don't think it's a great present. He'll just be disappointed if he doesn't get the cards he wants. Each Extreme Ninja pack contained 10 cards, but the only way to find out which ones was to open the pack, which meant that a player couldn't simply buy the particular card they had their eye on. In other words, the very act of buying Extreme Ninja cards was a gamble. Hinata had told Boruto until she was blue in the face that he shouldn't be doing anything remotely resembling gambling when he was still so young. But her son took no heed of her, and his room was scattered with doubles and other unwanted cards. When she brought up Extreme Ninja, it was with an ulterior motive. She thought that if she told her father all this, he would put aside the idea of giving the cards as a present and join her in trying to get Boruto to stop playing the game in consideration of his grandson's future. That is not so bad. Her father nodded, and Hinata realized she had missed the mark. Father? Are you actually listening to me? You can't know if the cards will be a hit. If you give him a bunch of misses, Boruto might end up even hating you, you know, she said, half in threat, as she leaned in toward him. But Hayashi was not ruffled in the least. I realize that. However, I wouldn't necessarily simply give him packs of cards. If shinobi from all times and places are the theme, then one of those cards must be mine. I was thinking of getting one of those for Boruto. Her father seemed extremely pleased with himself. Meanwhile, Hinata cradled her head in her hands at the hornet's nest she had stirred up. Okay. Hanabi came back in, carrying a binder. For all of her modesty about having a few cards, the orange binder was quite thick. Small decorative jewels spelled out her name in glittering letters on the cover, Have Naruto by H. Hanabi? Hinata furrowed her brow in confusion. You. That. You seem really into this. What's going on? Oh, it's one of those things. Her sister shrugged. Once you start collecting them, you just can't stop. She sighed and rolled her eyes, utterly exasperated. To think that not only her son, but her sister and father even would be so interested in this gambling game. So, let's have a look. Ayashi opened the binder. Each page had 9 cards, the faces of various ninja lined up on them. Hanabi pointed to one featuring the first Hokage, Senju Hashirama. On the bottom right here is the rarity. So SSR is super special rare. I'm not sure how to explain it, father. Maybe if these were Hanafuda cards, this would be a Goko, or run of 5 cards. And SR is super rare Shiko, or run of 4. R is rare, the Senko of 3. There's U and C, too, but those ones would be the easiest plays, I guess? Like Tan or Kasu. Hinata noticed a C on the face of her former teammate Aburame Shino, and suddenly she was done with the whole thing. Shino, a Kasu card. I see. Their father nodded, knowingly. The higher the roll points, the rarer the card. I can see why Boruto likes it. So then where am I? You're... here? Hanabi flipped through the pages and stopped exactly 1/3 of the way in. Pictured there was their youthful father. However, enough with the jokes, Hanabi. He turned to her with a bright smile that was unimaginable from the stern look on the card. This says our Boruto wouldn't want something so run-of-the-mill. If I'm going to give him one, it has to be an SSR me. Where's that one? Hanabi shook her head from side to side. What? You don't have it? He asked. She kept shaking her head. You can't mean... She said nothing and stared at their father. He stared back. Do you mean, he paused, pained, I stop at R? Hanabi bobbed her head up and down. Me, the head of the Hyuga main house, a mere R? That's ridiculous. With each word, the color drained from his face. That such a thing would befall the Hyugas, he murmured, stupefied. Unable to look directly at him anymore, Hinata averted her eyes. Hanabi apparently felt the same. Their eyes met in the place where they were averting them to. Again, she could tell right away what her sister wanted to say, so which one of us is going to console him? Then, almost as an afterthought, you go ahead and do the honors. With no other choice, Hinata smiled faintly. At father? Don't take it to heart. That's not what the village thinks. It's a children's game. Yes, right, Hanabi agreed. It's just the company that makes the game, in the end. Boruto'll have a real laugh at your expense if you take it all so seriously. Ayashi continued to stare out into empty space, heedless of his daughter's kind words. Hanabi waved a hand in front of his face to check if he was still with them. Hinata heard a strange sound, like an insect's wings, and then realized that her father was the source. He was whispering almost soundlessly. Should I do? What? She asked. To become SSR, what should I do? Once again, Hinata and Hanabi frowned as they met each other's eyes. Their attempt to console him had been in vain. Their father was going to be stubborn about this. She groped for some explanation, but what could she say to him when he was in this state? Not a single thing came to mind. When you look at the SSR people... Hanabi turned the binder page reluctantly. Well, it's an incredible lineup. The Kages, the 3 great shinobi. I don't know the criteria they set for this, but I guess you'd just have to go out and do something as great as they did. So you're saying go find fame? To think at this age, I would be pressed into service. Their father laughed in self-deprecation. A heavy, uncomfortable feeling lodged itself in the pit of Hinata's stomach as she sensed where the conversation was going. He couldn't possibly. I'll go to the Hokage and give a mission, he announced, standing up. Father? Father? His daughters hurriedly followed their father to their feet and tried to stop him somehow. Now? Hinata asked. Please stop this foolishness. Honestly, Hanabi sighed. The doctor said you were supposed to rest. Ah. This amount of pain is nothing at all. He moved to step out into the hall, clearly not interested in a word they had to say. He was putting on a brave act, but Hinata could see the awkward way he moved his legs. If something were to happen to you, father, the children would be sad, you know, she said. They'll be much sadder if they find out that their own grandfather is an old dodderer who is nothing more than an R, he shouted. I must become SSR, no matter what it takes, to make my adorable grandchildren happy. It's just a silly card game. You can't, Hanabi said. Please, just think dash. Enough. He would obviously brook no further argument. He slammed the sliding doors together, a physical punctuation mark for emphasis. Hinata groaned, while behind her Hanabi shrugged. Hinata definitely couldn't just leave their father to run off on a half-baked mission, so, little sister in tow, she headed for the Hokage's office. In front of the office door, Naruto Shikamaru was scratching his head, looking annoyed. I mean, you come in here out of the blue, demanding a mission, you know? Mission requests aren't even usually done here. That's what the counter at the front is for. The counter only handles the easy missions. As if to press the younger man for a reply, Hayashi took a step closer. What I'm looking for is an extremely difficult mission. I don't care what it is. Guarding a VIP, transporting goods, I'm not fussy. Where is this coming from? Shikamaru asked. I mean, you're the head of the Hyuga main house. I simply decided I needed to keep my skills up. Enough with all these questions. Shikamaru clearly wasn't going to swallow this explanation wholesale. An extremely difficult mission for the sake of your skills? You're quite confident there. His sarcasm was clear in both his voice and his gaze. He was too busy for this kind of bother. Hinata was on tenterhooks, but her sister could not have looked more carefree. The corners of her mouth relaxing into a grin, she whispered. In Hinata's ear, I guess he's still got enough sense in his head to care about what other people think since he's not coming straight out and saying he wants to increase the rarity of his card. I guess you're right. But I never thought he'd try to get a mission directly from Naruto. Hinata sighed. He was in charge of the most difficult missions the village of Konohagakure was hired for. And those were what their father had his sights set on. Hayashi paused. If I say I just dropped by to see my son-in-law, would you let me through? Unfortunately, the Lord Seventh has his hands full at the moment. That's why I'm here talking to you, sir. What a hassle. The words were clearly written on Shikamaru's face. Hinata wondered whether she should tell her father to come back another day, but then something Shikamaru said caught her attention. Is Naruto busy? HM? Yeah. Not sure if he'll be able to make it home. Toda, Shikamaru started and then seemed to realize he had slipped. He cut himself off and clicked his tongue instead. Nah, I mean, he's busy, but it's a thing he'll finish up today. He's really looking forward to family day tomorrow. Don't worry. He'll be home tonight. His sudden change of tune didn't entirely eliminate Hinata's unease. She was expecting Naruto to come home. That's why she'd left Himawari there. Naruto, you are coming home, right? She stared at the closed door of his office with worried eyes. So about the mission. Shikamaru dropped his gaze to the clipboard in his hand, as if to flee the awkward moment. Would it just be you, sir? Or, of course, just... Hanabi stepped forward to brush Hayashi aside and held up 3 fingers. A 3-person cell. Hanabi, father and older sister said at the same time. Hanabi turned first to their father. I know you've been training without a break, Father. I know that better than anyone. But it's been too long since you were in the field. A single-person mission with no backup is maybe too much. Hayashi couldn't really argue given that it was his sparring partner Hanabi saying this. Then Hanabi shifted her gaze, but Hinata was ready with her argument. If we're talking time out of the field, it's also been quite a while for me. True. Her younger sister nodded. It might be a lot for you after 10 or however many years as a housewife. But you worry if father went out on his own, right? Well, that's true, but what she really wanted at this moment, when it was uncertain if her husband would actually leave the office that day, was to make her apologies to her father and sister and go straight home for the sake of her children. But when she was about to confess these feelings, Hanabi's words back at the house wedged themselves in her throat, preventing her from speaking. You're thinking father's gotten old, aren't you? I think that's probably because of you. Well, what if you help out and spend some time with your father? Shikamaru seemed to take her silence as consent, rather than her desperately reaching for some way to get out of going anywhere, and he began to tell them at length the details of the mission. So a group of Byakugan users then. Okay. A developer breaking ground in the Konoha onsen area called us early this morning. Seems like someone stole the explosives they use for excavation work and then took off. The site's full of steam, so they can't see anything at all, which makes it hard to go after the thief. But that shouldn't be an issue for the Byakugan. This page has a map and the other details. I shouldn't have come, Hanabi complained at the onsen area, a half-day's journey from the Hokage's office, even though she was the one who had taken the lead in putting them in that place. What is that smell? Like rotten eggs. Ah, seriously. I really like this kimono. My best kimono will be ruined if that stink settles into the fabric. You should have changed then, Hinata chided her sister as she trailed along behind her, but she too cringed at the strange, persistent stink that found its way into her mouth no matter how shallow her breaths. Plus, the area was a rocky zone untouched by any human hand and made slippery by the steam. Not to mention that the hills were painfully steep. And so, yeah. Her feet quickly went out from under her. She flung her hands up to try and maintain her balance and ended up slapping Hanabi hard in the face. Ack, her sister cried. I am sorry. And you, Hinata, why are you in sandals? Hanabi groaned, tearfully, holding her nose. Just as Shikamaru had told them at the office, geysers erupted all over the area, blanketing the world in steam and coloring their field of view a snowy white. They were just barely able to make headway thanks to the Byakugan, but her eyes were gradually getting more and more tired. Up ahead's no good. We'll have to detour. In the lead, their father started them off in yet another direction. Again? Hanabi reproached him. Father, we've just been going round and round in circles, haven't we? If you don't like it, you can leave, he sniffed. If we keep going straight, we'll be waking up in the afterlife in seconds. On top of everything else, clouds of natural poisonous gas drifted about, meaning they couldn't simply march forward the way they would have liked to. Hanabi seemed to be pouting, but perhaps accepting that their father's decision was the right one, she didn't question him further. Instead, she started complaining again. Honestly, what's this thief doing running off into a place like this? It stinks, it's hot, it's humid, and if you're not careful, you'll die. I would think this is basically the worst place in the world for a hideout. Maybe they thought it would be good for hiding precisely because no one comes here, Hinata suggested. If they're just going to hide, then sure, Hanabi assented. But what about after that? After? She paused. Shikamaru said the thief might use the stolen explosives for terrorism. So then they'll have to head down to the village again, right? Her sister said. In which case, they should have looked for an abandoned building there to use as a hideout instead of running off into this nightmare of a place. Hinata assumed her sister was just grumbling about the thief, but that was apparently not the case. I mean, he said explosives, but the ones they use for excavation can't be that powerful, Hanabi noted. Would you risk your life for something like that? And we can walk around here because of who we are, but most people be dead already, you know? They're doing research into all kinds of scientific ninja tools lately, Hinata said. Maybe there's one to detect smoke and poison. But if they had access to stuff like that, they wouldn't be stealing a bunch of pathetic explosives. And why wouldn't they use some super explosive created with the full might of science? Something's off here, Hanabi concluded. Both of you, that's enough chit-chat, their father said, looking ahead. Hinata also focused her Byakugan and saw human silhouettes in the steam about 40 meters ahead. 3, just like her group. All were equipped with ostentatious masks with cylindrical filters. It seemed that the detours their father had taken them on had brought them into contact with the thieves sooner than initially expected. Poison. None. I'll take the one in the center. Hanabi, you're on the right. Hinata, the left. Let's go, their father instructed, and dashed into the curtain of steam. Sweat sprang up on the palms of her hands. She still trained with Boruto at the house, but it had been a long time since she'd seen actual combat. But there was no time to hesitate. She had to go after her father right away. Hayashi had no sooner leaped out in front of them than their opponents were crying out in bewilderment. Huh? Well, who are you? No questions. This is for the sake of my grandchildren. Ready yourself. Hayashi spread his legs apart and hunkered down deeply. Art of the Gentle Fist. 8 trigrams 64 palms. He bundled his fingertips together and stepped toward his opponent. 8 trigrams 2 palms. Ga! 361 Tenketsu chakra points existed within the body. 4 palms. Ga! Hayashi saw all of them with the Byakugan. 8 palms. Ba! His speed belied his age. 32 palms. He pierced each chakra point with unerring precision. 64 palms. Blah! The opponent, powerless against the essence of the Gentle Fist, was sent flying. The gas mask came off her face and carved a clean arc out in the air. Hayashi looked down on his opponent, who was unable to even scream in agony as she convulsed and twitched. Did you see that? Hyuga is the strongest in all of Konoha. Best remember that. However, perhaps sensing eyes on him, Hayashi looked around suspiciously. Hanabi sighed. In a panic, Hinata was racing over to the opponent he knocked flying. The 2 opponents his daughters were supposed to have taken care of were glaring at him, and the expressions beneath their masks were fierce. Hanabi gently pointed to the armband one was wearing around his shoulder. Permission to excavate Konoha Onsen, it read. He'd seen the Tenketsu clearly, but in his great hurry to please his grandchildren, Hayashi had overlooked something even more important. Ah, Hanabi moaned. It is settling in. Hanabi, Hinata snapped. Stop sniffing at your kimono like an animal. It's indecent. It was past midnight. They were walking toward the foot of the onsen town after coming down from the rocky zone. The distinctive scent also rose up from the river that ran alongside the road, but it was almost pleasant compared with the stench in the highlands earlier. This, indeed, was the fragrant aroma of the onsen. Whatever. It's all in your clothes too, right? And I mean, father, Hanabi started and then looked around. Their father was gone. Father? Oh, there he is. Far in the distance behind them, he trudged along, shoulders slumped. Sorrow oozed like chakra from his entire body. Hanabi's face clouded over as if under the spell of this malaise. Well, it's no wonder. Hayashi had taken down the developer who hired them for the mission in the first place. It turned out the mission information itself had been mistaken. The explosives hadn't actually been stolen, it had been a mere miscount. The perpetrator who had supposedly fled inland was just an incorrectly identified tourist sneaking in for a soak at the source. Although an apology had been sent to the Hokage's office with a request to cancel the mission, it was already too late. The Hyuga family had already marched up into the mountains, just missing the messenger. Since everyone involved had made a mistake, the developers were turning a blind eye to the whole thing, fortunately. But Hayashi was utterly dejected. If he couldn't fulfill his objective of carrying out a difficult mission, he couldn't make Boruto happy either. Well, that was a sorry excuse for a mission. But to think that father would just charge in like that without double-checking who was ahead. Hanabi cried out. Why did we even come along? SHH. Hinata held a finger to her lips. He's upset enough. You don't have to go on and on about it. Fine. But he can't hear us. He's stuck way back there. And indeed, their father was lagging far behind. It would take a while for him to catch up. So what do you want to do? Find a hotel or something? Hanabi asked while they waited. I'd like to head home right now if I could. Hinata frowned. I just know Naruto's going to be late, and I didn't leave supper for the kids. You'll never make it now. I know you're worried about Himawari and Boruto, but you could walk all night without stopping, and it'd still be morning before you got there. Hanabi chuckled, knowingly. And anyway, I already told Boruto you'd be gone, so... What? Hinata shrieked. I told him to work something out for supper. He was just happy he got to play video games for as long as he wanted. But, just the kids alone. How about you trust them a little bit? Hanabi suggested, archly. He is buying underpants on his own now. That's got nothing to do with this, she protested. I have to watch out for those kids of mine. Oh. Come on. Her sister's eyes glittered dangerously. Face reality. You can't go home today. Boruto and Himawari are fine. And I want to soak in the onsen. She waved a smelly kimono sleeve and emphasized each and every word as though teaching a baby how to talk. And this is a hot spring cure for father. We came all the way to the onsen, after all. You also have to make time for yourself sometimes, Hinata. Before she could respond, Hanabi moved the conversation forward on her own. Shading her eyes with a hand, she glanced around at the nearby inns. How about that one? Looks good, anyway. Eventually, they settled on a place and went over to ask about rooms. The sign hanging outside read Shika no Tsuno Onsen. Oh! Hinata said, the instant she laid eyes on it. What? Hanabi turned to look at her. You don't like it? Huh? Oh, no. It's not that. Yeah? Okay, so there. Hanabi just pushed her sister's objections aside as she turned toward their father, still lagging some ways back on the road. Father? We're going to the onsen. Hurry you up. The water'll get cold. It was unclear whether or not the word onsen had any effect, but there. Father's pace did increase ever so slightly. Pink. The wooden bucket hit the floor in the large outdoor bath, which was surrounded by a wall of trees. The woman finished rinsing off and headed for the changing room, leaving only Hinata and Hanabi behind in the bath, perhaps because of the already late hour. Heh. It's like we have our own private bath here. Hair tied up on top of her head, Hanabi leaned back against the edge and stretched out, her skin making a somehow satisfying squeaking sound against the wall of the tub. This feels so good, I guess not too many people are staying here tonight. Hinata rubbed her legs under the hot water. Her joints were stiff and sore, perhaps from too much walking. She looked up at the starry sky peeking out over the edge of the rain eve. Maybe they've all got rooms in town because of tomorrow. Family day. So, Hinata? Hanabi stretched a hand down into the water, and PLSH. Wavelets rippled outward. What do you remember when you think about family? What? Hinata furrowed her brow. I have lots of memories. Like Boruto's birthday or... No, not that. I'm not talking about Boruto and Himawari. I mean, memories of father. Of father? Especially from when we were little. Got anything? Hinata dropped her gaze to the water's surface and stared at her own face wobbling in the waves, but not a single thing came to mind. Although she thought about it until the waves died down, she still couldn't come up with an answer. Training, I guess, she said, finally. I knew it. Me, too. Hanabi sounded embarrassed somehow. Like, training in the breaks from training. It was totally normal for us, so I didn't think much of it. But, I mean, he never took us to play anywhere. He was so focused on protecting the Hyuga family and Konoha, and Hinata agreed. Yeah. It's not like I especially hated it, though. I like training. But... Hanabi paused. When I see how good Naruto is with Boruto and Himawari, it's like maybe father was going too far or something. Hinata took this in. I guess. Fathers. He seems happier now. Took the words out of my mouth. Giggling, the sisters exchanged a grin. Eventually, their laughter died down and silence fell over the outdoor bath. Only the quiet sound of the water pumping in reached Hinata's ears. She gave herself over to the warmth of the water for a while. So, like... Hanabi opened her mouth again after what seemed like careful deliberation. After you said how busy the Lord Hokage was, father started to say something. So then... Remember? Yes. Hinata remembered right away. He suddenly got so quiet. I thought it was weird. Want me to tell you what he was going to say? Hanabi slid over to Hinata, parting the water before her. They were so close their shoulders were touching as Hanabi peered into her sister's face. So then how about you bring Boruto and Himawari home with you until things settle down for the Lord Hokage? That's what he was going to say. What? Go to her family home with her children? She was taken utterly off guard and all she could do was stare at her sister, frozen. It's hard for you to look after Boruto and Himawari all by yourself. Hanabi said. And father would be over the moon if he could live with his beloved grandchildren. I don't think it's such a bad idea. Not bad? So you think I should, too? If it will make father happy, I'm all for it, Hanabi declared. She snapped her mouth shut and waited intently for an answer. But there was no way Hinata could simply decide something like that on the spur of the moment. A hint of despair crept into her sister's white eyes. You don't want to? I want to help for father's sake, but... Hinata trailed off. He seems happier now than he used to, Hanabi remarked. You said so yourself. I did, but... I mean, you springing this on me, how am I supposed to? What? Silence once more. Hanabi's despair wasn't just in her eyes now, it spread to her whole body. This is going nowhere, she said in a strained voice, and stepped out of the bath. She wound a towel around herself, and Hinata heard a familiar sound. Karake, Karake. Let's settle this right now. Hanabi looked down on her with Byakugan eyes. We fight, Hinata. If I win, you come home. Why are you here? Don't be silly. Hinata tried to smooth things over, but she knew looking at Hanabi that this was no joke. She was dead serious, a fact that came through loud and clear. Her little sister meant business. What? You afraid you'll lose? Hanabi challenged. Hinata was at a loss for words. Still not talking? Come on. Get ready. Hurry up. Reluctantly, Hinata got out of the bath and wrapped a towel around herself. With her eyes, she asked, do we really have to do this? But her sister's will was firm, unshakable. With no other choice, Hinata focused her power in her eyes, bringing out her Byakugan, and faced Hanabi. She remembered how they sparred when they were little. Mock battles in the courtyard of the main house with the Hyuga family watching over them. Back then, her little sister had been the better strategist, and their father had given up on Hinata, a talentless shinobi. But her trip down memory lane didn't last long. Hanabi came flying at her without a word or any starting signal. The heel of her sister's palm drove in at her. She parried with one arm and dodged the striking hand that followed with her other. Hanabi whirled around and launched a sword hand at her, but Hinata sank down and dodged it by a hair's breadth. The chakra imbued in each and every blow was so great that one direct hit could decide the whole fight. Hinata struck out with a hand, too, and no sooner had her sister dodged this than she was sweeping out for a kick to knock Hanabi to the floor. Perhaps judging that she wouldn't be able to completely absorb this kick, Hanabi threw herself backward, then took a step to get even more distance between them. Hinata saw her opportunity and stepped forward with a palm strike. But Hanabi brushed it aside with a fist, knocking her off balance. Her sister didn't miss the chance to counterattack with another palm strike. NGH. Hinata just barely managed to dodge, but if Hanabi kept charging her like this, she wouldn't be able to avoid the next hit. She thrust her palm out in a sweeping stroke, a single blow at the chin. Hanabi twisted her head to avoid the strike, but the force of Hinata's blow kicked up a sudden gust that pulled her hair down from where it was tied up on top of her head. Brownish black hair flew out around her, and she leapt backward, perhaps impeded by the sudden halo of hair. Neither of them was breathing hard, but Hinata was frustrated. She was duller than when she's been on active duty and working missions. Hanabi couldn't have been going easy on her because of this, and indeed, her little sister opened her mouth and dispelled any doubt she might have had. "I'm surprised. I planned to decide this on the first blow. You're still pretty sharp, Hinata, ***. When it comes to the basics, I've been teaching Boruto at home." "Makes sense." Boruto came over to check, whether or not the Byakugan had manifested. So I did a little sparring with him then. Nothing hard. He wasn't too bad. "You sparred with Boruto?" Hinata cried. "What were you thinking? He's still a child." "He's not a child," Hanabi pronounced, crisply. "He's getting genin missions. His physical techniques are on par with any adult's. It's not that he's not trying to set out on his own, it's that you can't let him go. Isn't that right, Hinata?" "You." She was at a loss for words. "Can you really say I'm wrong?" her sister said, as if returning to the conversation at the house, although all trace of the mischievousness she'd seen on Hanabi's face then had completely vanished. "It's the same as father becoming grandfather. Time marches forward. And that boy, he's growing up. How about you accept it already? I think that would make Boruto happy." Hinata stared at her wordlessly. She thought her children would be children forever. They'd come to her in tears when they skinned their knees, they'd crawl into her futon with her when they had a scary dream. But Boruto had already stopped crying in front of her. He wasn't frightened of scary dreams anymore. He was. He's not a child anymore? Suddenly, she remembered what her father had said at the house. "It's much more difficult than you'd imagine to admit you're old." That was exactly it, she thought. Time flowed, and Boruto moved away from her. She hadn't wanted to accept it, so she pretended she didn't see it. Pretended he would forever be a child who needed her. And, I don't just want father and Boruto to be happy. Hanabi started to close the distance between them once more. Hinata stepped forward at the ready, but her sister was already 10 steps ahead. Right hand, left hand, one palm strike after another. "I want that for you, too, Hinata." After dodging the strikes, Hinata dropped down and tried to sweep Hanabi's feet out from under her, but her sister leaped up to somehow evade her and then dropped down from the sky, kicking. "Me?" She crossed her arms and managed to catch her sister's legs somehow. The shock shuddered through her very bones. Unconsciously, she stiffened up. The Hokage promised. On your wedding day, he promised to make you happy. Hanabi bounced up from where she'd landed and charged Hinata, fists flying. Hinata just barely managed to keep from being hit, but then a palm strike flew in, catching her unawares. But he didn't keep that promise, did he? Hanabi shouted as she launched a roundhouse from behind to sweep Hinata's feet out from under her, while still attacking relentlessly with her hands, and then shot out with a dizzying succession of kicks. Hinata practically fell over backward, but she managed to dodge somehow. Still, her narrow escape left no room to counterattack, and she was forced to keep retreating. He's too busy with the Hokage work, and he never comes home. Without hesitation, Hanabi swooped in closer and dropped down, ready to strike with her hands again. If he saw the house empty, his family gone, Hinata wouldn't be able to escape this one unscathed. She braced herself and got ready to strike. Then maybe he would actually pay attention to his family. In the next instant, the sisters' blows slammed against each other. The air itself ripped apart and echoed in the deserted bath area. Neither of their hands had hit home. Instead, they'd slipped off to the sides, but now that their arms were crossed up against each other, neither sister could move. They were too close to each other to launch another blow. Her sister a heartbeat away from her, Hinata stared into her eyes. She thought that this would be enough to see what her sister was feeling. And in fact, it was. But she couldn't believe her sister was so upset about this. "You're wrong, Hanabi," Hinata whispered. "How am I wrong?" Hanabi glanced at Hinata's side with stern eyes. Perhaps seeing an opening there, she swept aside their deadlocked arms and lashed out with a palm strike. But Hinata had left herself open as bait. She twisted around and dodged the blow with a flowing movement before striking down Hanabi's outstretched arm. A dash? Her sister fell forward, her back defenseless. Hinata hesitated for an instant. But then she slammed her arm down onto her sister's back. "Oh!" Hanabi hit the wooden floor face first. Hinata let out a long sigh. Not at her sister, but rather a sigh of relief that the contest had finally been decided. "That's my win." "Yeah?" Holding her nose, Hanabi turned partway toward her. She'd released her Byakugan, but her eyes looked resentful. Still, she didn't protest Hinata's decision. Instead, she asked, in a teary voice, "How am I wrong?" Hinata looked around the outdoor bath. "Here. This onsen. Shikanotsu no onsen. I have a lot of memories in this place." She smiled fondly. "I came here on my honeymoon with Naruto. He hasn't changed a bit since then." Hanabi was sulking, utterly uninterested, but Hinata paid her no mind. Some memories take shape and stick with you, and some don't. Places, memories. Do you want to forget your time training with father? Sometimes, Hanabi admitted. Like, the days when he would yell at me because I wasn't getting any better. But all of it? Well, Hanabi fell silent, but that was an answer in and of itself, and she knew that just as well as Hinata did. For Boruto and Himawari, all their memories right now are in that house. The sunflower seeds we planted in the garden, the notches in the wall to record how tall they are. Those. She hesitated, but then steeled herself to continue. Those memories are important, a time when Boruto was a child who needed me. That's why I can't come home. Hanabi looked sad at this. And, you know, her cheeks were cool from the evaporated bath water, but now she felt them warm ever so slightly. "You're right, Hanabi. Naruto is busy. But he's absolutely keeping his promise. I'm happy. I've always been. I feel the same way as I did when we were here on our honeymoon." A gentle smile played on her lips. "Because I love Naruto dash." "Oh, enough. Stop. I get it. Don't make me listen to you gush about him. Hanabi sounded entirely unamused as she plugged her ears. She even squeezed her eyes shut tightly, not even wanting to look at her sister's flushed cheeks. Once you get started on the lovey-dovey stuff, you never stop. Seriously. Makes my ears hurt. Ouch. You don't have to go that far. Well, if you're happy, I guess it's fine. She said this too quietly for Hinata to hear, though. What did you say? Hinata asked. Nothing. Hanabi let out an exaggerated sigh and moved toward the tub. I got all worked up for nothing. I'm totally chilled to the bone. Maybe I'll jump back in the bath. You should warm up, too, Aya. Perhaps because her eyes were still shut, her foot got caught on the edge of the tub and she fell forward into the bath. A huge plume of water splashed up and drops of bath water flew everywhere. Father? Are you going to sulk about this forever? The following day they set out on the road back to the village, which would no doubt be busy with family day. Ayashi's shoulders were still slumped, but he seemed a bit better. He was keeping up with them now, at least. Whether she liked it or not, Hinata could hear her father and sister talking behind her. Don't hang your head like that. You'll fall if you're not careful. Like a certain someone yesterday. You don't have to try so hard. You don't have to get Boruto X cards. You can get him something else, like senbei. With the double punch of rich soy and regular soy, he'll be in heaven. Actually, their father said. Hinata stopped, and her father and sister did the same. I was thinking about this yesterday when I was soaking in the bath alone. Those things are really just tea cakes for old people. I need to give them something a younger tongue would enjoy. Hanabi was stunned into silence, but quickly recovered and urged him to continue. So then? So? Let's see. Hamburgers, perhaps? He raised a doubtful eyebrow. Hanabi clapped excitedly. Perhaps encouraged by this, their father continued. So for Himawari, I suppose candy with fresh cream would be better than Anko or syrup candies. Cake or pudding or some such. I think that would be good. Really good. Right? Hanabi cast a pointed look in Hinata's direction. Hinata nodded firmly. Now that that's decided. Their father started walking again at a vigorous pace that belied his years. Once we get back to the village, I'll have to stop by the hamburger shop and the bakery. He gradually pulled ahead of his daughters. He was moving so quickly, there was a chance he might break into a run. Honestly, father. You get all worked up so quickly. I guess it's okay so long as you don't knock your back out again. Hanabi giggled. Father? Do you need me to carry your things? Hanabi chased after their father, and Hinata watched as they grew smaller. He had changed. And he was trying to change again now. There was nothing in this world that didn't change. The same could no doubt be said about me. She had to change. From a pathetic mother who couldn't let her children go into one who properly acknowledged their growth. Hinateya, what are you doing? We're leaving you. Hanabi called. Hinata gasped. Before she knew it, they had pulled far ahead of her. She didn't have to worry about the house. Even if her husband didn't come home, Boruto was there. She could leave Himawari to him. So, maybe she could spend a little more time with these two, if they just needed someone to carry things. Hinata started to run. Shino's interludes. Number 2. Master Shino. NX cards. The insects had finally calmed back down by the time Shino took a stroll down an alley in the old town. Far from the hustle and bustle, he enjoyed the warm light of the sun on his skin. He was this close to stretching out with abandon, regardless of what anyone thought. However, when he did actually stretch out languidly, he stopped suddenly, like a puppet that had run out of chakra. His eyes grew round beneath his goggles, unable to fully take in the scene before him. The master of the Hyuga main family was in front of the sweet shop. Of all things, Hyuga Hayashi was the father of his former teammate, Hinata. Even to flatter them, he would have been hard-pressed to say that father and daughter were close. He'd never so much as seen them together. And he remembered how Hinata had seemed very unhappy every time the topic of her family came up. Thus, Shino had never exchanged so much as a word with Hayashi. But the issue wasn't simply that he and Hinata didn't get along, it lay with Hayashi himself. He had a tendency to view other clans as lesser somehow. Given that Shino belonged to the Aburame clan, this kind of conversation tended to be uncomfortable. But this was in the past now. He heard that Hayashi had mellowed a great deal. Shino walked over to him. "Hello." The older man slowly turned around. "Aren't you, Aburame?" Shino, "Yes. I went out on missions on the same team as your daughter." "Oh. With Hinata?" Hayashi grinned, broadly. The threatening air that had once caused Shino to recoil was so dialed down that Shino almost wondered if it had ever existed. "What are you up to today?" And Shino glanced over to check that the shop owner was too far away to hear him before continuing. "In a place like this?" The Hyugas were one of the leading families in Konohagakure. In other words, they were rich. Shino would have thought they would go to the department store instead of a sad little shop like this to buy sweets, to a place where they carried the best luxury brands, half a dozen cookies all in their own wrappers. Or else call a chef to their house and have those sweets prepared for them. Hayashi raised an eyebrow. "Just doing a little shopping." Shino dropped his eyes. "Ah," he said. "Extreme Ninja, X cards." Shino knew about the game. He hadn't actually bought any of the cards, but his students at the academy were obsessed with them. He would sometimes hear their voices inside when he was about to enter the classroom for a lesson. "Shino Festival. Shino Festival again." "Nah, seriously, it's a Shino Festival." By Shino Festival, the students meant that they kept getting Shino's card, which had the lowest rarity of C. It appeared so often it wasn't even a joke, it was a junk card. Every time he heard his students groaning at this, Shino was thankful for the goggles on his face. They kept anyone from noticing if a tear or two spilled from his eyes. He was about to mention how surprising it was that Hayashi would be interested in Extreme Ninja. He'd simply assumed that this sort of commonplace dalliance was Karake, Karake. He heard a faint, familiar sound. The sound of the Byakugan being activated. Shino unconsciously dropped into a defensive posture and looked over at Hayashi to find that he was examining the X card packs one after another with Byakugan eyes. "This one's R. This one is, too. This is SSR. Ah. I found a good present for Boruto. He couldn't possibly be. He's looking inside the packs with his Byakugan and picking cards? That's cheating." In high spirits, Hayashi headed for the cash register, while behind him, Shino's shoulders slumped. End of Chapter 2. Thank you for listening. Remember to like and subscribe for lots more.